This is the Canon 40mm f2.8 STM. Now this is a brilliant little lens. Honestly, before I say anything else, you cannot go wrong with this lens. It's cheap, it's small, and the image quality is really fantastic. Now to talk about the image quality a bit, you really have to think about how little you're paying for this lens. Here in the UK you're looking at paying about £120 to £130 for this lens, which is really next to nothing when you consider what you're getting. In terms of the actual image sharpness, I would honestly put this on par with my 70 to 200. Now, obviously they fall into very different price categories and very different categories of function, but this 40mm is honestly unbelievable. In terms of the images you get out of it, whether you're using it on a full-frame 5D Mark III like I do most of the time, or a crop sensor 60D, which I've also done for a number of years, the images you get back really are incredible. Now, f2.8 isn't a particularly wide aperture. It's not going to compete with a 51.4 or a 51.8 even, but it's wide enough in order to get some really nice blurred out backgrounds, and this lens renders them really nicely, even down to f4 and things like that. The fact that it has enough aperture blades in order to keep the bokeh balls looking really nice and smooth is really good. Now, I use this lens a lot for portraiture. I used it on my 5D Mark III and on my 60D. On the 60D, obviously, it's a 64mm, and actually having the extra compression is really nice. Now, I imagine a lot of you watching this will be looking to buy this lens for a crop sensor camera, and honestly, you cannot go wrong. It will produce brilliant images time after time, and I really think it's worth it. The vignetting on this lens is almost non-existent. There's almost no vignetting at all. It's really, really good. There's a little sort of a really natural tiny vignette in the corners, but it's nothing you'd ever notice unless you're literally taking a photo of a white wall. Now, if you're interested in chromatic aberration, not that it's a particularly big deal anymore, not with Lightroom and the in-camera corrections that exist these days, this lens has no chromatic aberrations, so to speak. I've never had problems with chromatic aberrations at all. No lateral chromatic aberrations, literally no chromatic aberrations. It's brilliant. The optical design is fantastic. Autofocus is another really interesting part of this lens. Now, it uses one of Canon's STM motors, or stepping motors, which means that it's really good for video because it's a really smooth and quiet autofocusing procedure. For photography, it's less important. Obviously, having a quiet autofocus is still really nice, but it's less vital. The autofocus speed of this lens isn't brilliant. It's nothing to sort of complain about, but it's not as fast as, for instance, a USM lens. The other really important part of this lens is build quality. Now, obviously, it's nothing to look at. It's tiny. It is dwarfed by every other lens I own. Even when I had a 50mm 1.8 back in the day, that towered over it. This really is a pancake lens. It's completely flat, which is really good for a number of reasons. Obviously, it doesn't weigh a lot, so you can really carry it around on even a heavier camera body like the 5D, just for the entire day without complaining. The other thing is that the small size means if you're going on holiday, for instance, your camera and lens will just slide into a pocket or a bag or something like that without any bother. Now, if there were a couple of things I would complain about with this lens, the first of these would be the filter size. Now, the lens for some reason uses a 52mm filter, which is really, really small. All my other filters are 67 and 77mm, so having this one lens with a really tiny filter is a bit ridiculous, but that's more a complaint that I have myself than an actual flaw in the design. If there were a flaw in the design, I think it's the fact that it doesn't have a weather seal. Now, a lot of the more expensive Canon lenses, the L series for instance, they all have weather seals, which means you can leave them on your camera and go out in the rain and it doesn't really matter. Now, obviously you can't expect to have everything with a lens that costs so little, but I think having a weather seal on this lens really would make it perfect for everyday use. You really wouldn't ever have to take it off your camera. Coming to the end of the video then, I wanted to show you a couple of the images I've taken with this lens over the years. So I've owned this lens since I think 2013 is when I first got it, and at that point I was using it primarily on my 60D. So a lot of the images that you'll be seeing here will be from my 60D, but there are also a good few from other cameras like my 5D in there. Now, obviously you'll have to take these images with a pinch of salt because I've edited them in my own way. I don't tend to sharpen images because it's just not something I'm really into, but I do sometimes add some grain, so take that into consideration when you're weighing up whether this lens is the right buy for you. Drawing to a conclusion then, I think this lens is an absolutely brilliant all-rounder, no matter what you do. Whether you're just a casual shooter going out for day trips and stuff, taking photos of your children and your family and goodness knows what, even animals and stuff, this lens is brilliant. It's so light, so small, and so easy to use that I think you can't go far wrong. If you're a video shooter, I think this lens is also really good. Obviously having an STM motor means it's really nice and quiet for video shooting, and the fact that it's so small is also really useful for that, because often with video rigs you're carrying around a lot of gear, and perhaps you don't want to carry a big heavy lens. Even if you're a professional, I think this lens is something you should consider having in your bag. Because of the size, I think it puts people off a lot less. I find a lot of the time when I have people in front of this camera, they're intimidated by bigger lenses, so having a small lens like that still produces professional grade images is really useful. And I think that's it. I think that's everything there is to say about this lens. I would honestly recommend it to every single one of you watching. It is just that good. If you want to see some more of me, you can check out my Instagram in the description below, where I post images on a very regular basis. There are also links there to my website and other stuff if you want to have a look. Otherwise, you can check out the other videos on this channel. Feel free to like and subscribe if that's something you're into, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!